Chapter 1, The Quiet After Applause. The folding chairs were uncomfortable in a way Carson Dellan had learned to endure without complaint. He shifted his weight slightly, knees angled outward, hands folded neatly in his lap as if he were posing for a photograph no one had asked him to take. Around him, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Parents fanning themselves with programs, siblings whispering. Someone coughing too loudly 3 rows back. Melody sat beside him, radiant in a blue dress she'd debated buying for weeks and then pretended had been no trouble at all. She leaned toward him, voice low. Row C, 3rd from the left. I checked. Carson smiled. I trust you. She laughed softly. You always do. On stage, the dean adjusted the microphone. Applause rose and fell in polite waves. Carson clapped when expected, smiled when appropriate, and felt the familiar swell of pride as Erica's name was called. Their daughter crossed the stage with the confidence of someone who believed the world was already making room for her. Melody's hand flew to her mouth. Carson stood before he realized he was moving, clapping harder than necessary, chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with emotion alone. Erica accepted her diploma, turned, and scanned the crowd until she found them. She grinned, lifted her chin, and for just a second looked like she had when she was 6 and riding her bike without training wheels. That's my girl, Carson said quietly. Melody nodded, eyes glossy. We did good. The words landed differently than she intended. We're done, his mind supplied, uninvited. The ceremony ended. Families surged toward the exits. Photos were taken in front of banners. Laughter echoed. Carson held jackets, phones, and a bouquet someone had handed him without explanation. He smiled through it all, practiced and sincere. That night, the house felt larger. Erica's suitcase stood by the door, already packed for the weekend visit to the city, where she'd soon live permanently. The walls seemed to lean back, listening. Carson rinsed dishes at the sink, moving slowly. Melody dried beside him. You were quiet tonight, she said. He shrugged. Big day. She studied him for a moment, then smiled. You're allowed to feel things, you know? I know. He meant it. He just didn't know what he was feeling. Later, after Melody went upstairs, Carson stayed behind. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. The clock ticked loudly. He hadn't noticed that before. For 23 years, his life had been structured by necessity. Soccer schedules, tuition payments, career choices made for stability, not curiosity. He told himself, truthfully, that it was enough, that providing was purpose, and it had been. But now, for the first time, there was nothing demanding his sacrifice. The realization wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, heavy. He thought about the guitar he'd sold when Erica was born. The trip to Italy he and Melody had once planned and quietly abandoned. The notebook of ideas he'd shoved into a drawer because there was always something more important. He wasn't angry. He wasn't resentful. He was simply awake. Upstairs, Melody paused at the top of the steps, listening. When she heard nothing, she frowned slightly, then went to bed. Carson stayed where he was, staring at the empty chair across from him, wondering, without fear, what it might be like to finally sit in it. Chapter 2, The Conversation That Isn't a Fight. Carson woke before his alarm, which annoyed him only because he no longer had a reason to be awake that early. For years, his mornings had been governed by necessity. Lunches to pack, schedules to coordinate, commutes timed to the minute. Now the house was quiet in a way that felt earned and unfamiliar, like a pension he wasn't sure how to spend. He lay still, listening to Melody's breathing beside him. Even, comfortable, the sound of someone who trusted tomorrow to behave itself. He turned onto his side and watched the ceiling fan complete slow, lazy revolutions. At some point, the thought he'd been avoiding settled into words. I need to tell her. Not because she demanded it. Not because he was unhappy. Because whatever this feeling was, this widening space inside his chest, it didn't belong to him alone. Downstairs, he made coffee strong enough to be considered a suggestion rather than a beverage. Melody appeared a few minutes later in a robe that had seen better decades and slippers that had survived 2 children and 1 leaky dog bowl. You're up early, she said, squinting at him. So are you. I always wake up early. I just don't admit it. He smiled and slid a mug toward her. She wrapped both hands around it, inhaled, and sighed. House feels weird, she said. Yeah. She waited, eyes on him over the rim. What kind of weird? She asked. Carson leaned back in his chair. The kitchen light cast a pale square on the table between them, like neutral territory. The kind where you realize something's over, he said. And you don't know what comes next. Melody blinked. You mean parenting? I mean active duty parenting, he said gently. The kind where we're needed every minute. She considered that. I suppose. He nodded. That's the thing. I don't suppose. I feel it. Deeply. She frowned, not angry, just alert. Okay. Carson took a breath. He'd practiced this in his head all night, and still the words came out less rehearsed than he'd hoped. I've been thinking about what comes next. For me. Melody set her mug down slowly. For us. For me, he repeated, then softened it. Which affects us. She leaned back, crossing her arms, not defensively, but protectively, like someone bracing for weather. "All right," she said. "Talk." He appreciated that about her. Melody didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to reassure or refute. She listened like the outcome mattered. "For 23 years, he said, "I've made choices based on responsibility, on what needed to be done. And I don't regret that. Not once." She nodded. "You've been a good husband and father." "I know," he said. "And I don't say that arrogantly. I say it factually. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself what I wanted. Not because you asked me to. Not because the kids demanded it. I just did." Melody tilted her head. "I thought you were happy." "I was content," he said. "There's a difference." The silence stretched, not sharp, but taut. "What are you saying?" she asked finally. "I'm saying that I think I've earned the right to want something for myself." Her eyebrows drew together. "Do you want to leave?" "No." "Are you unhappy with me?" "No." "Then why does this feel like bad news?" Carson exhaled a quiet laugh. "Because it's change. And we're old enough to know that change doesn't ask permission." She looked away, toward the window where the morning light had begun to creep in. "I've always had my friends. My hobbies." "I know," he said. "And I never minded. Truly. Are you saying I should have noticed something?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm saying this isn't about blame. It's about acknowledgement." She turned back to him, eyes searching. "What do you want, Carson?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud would make it real. "I want to explore the things I put aside," he said. "I want to try, to fail, to succeed at something that isn't about providing." Melody's voice dropped. "And where does that leave me?" He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "With me. Just not in charge of my fulfillment." That landed harder than he intended. She stiffened. "I've never tried to control you." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not saying you did. I'm saying I let myself be defined by what I gave. And now I want to see who I am without that structure." She swallowed. "So this is a midlife crisis." He smiled. "If it is, it's the least dramatic one in history." "That's not comforting." "I'm not buying a motorcycle." She snorted despite herself, then caught it. "You're serious?" "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "I'm trying to understand why this feels like you're moving forward and I'm standing still." He considered that. "Maybe because you've always had room to move." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "I'm not accusing," he said. "I'm explaining." Silence again. This one heavier. "When did you start feeling this way?" she asked. "Yesterday," he said. "And 10 years ago. And maybe always." She shook her head slowly. "You should have told me." "I didn't know how," he said. "And I didn't want to sound ungrateful." Melody stood, pacing the length of the kitchen, robe swaying. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know pretending nothing's changed isn't an option." She stopped in front of him. "Are you asking for permission?" "No," he said softly. "I'm asking for understanding." She looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Not acceptance. Not resistance. Recognition. "You've always done what was needed," she said. "I just assumed that was who you were." "So did I." She nodded slowly. "Okay. That's it?" he asked, surprised. "No," she said. "That's the beginning." She reached for her mug, then paused. "I don't promise to be comfortable with this." "I don't need comfortable," he said. "I need honest." She met his gaze. "Then be patient." "I have been," he said gently. "For a long time." She didn't argue. They drank their coffee in silence, but it was different now. Less empty, more deliberate. When Melody finally stood to head upstairs, she paused behind him and rested her hands on his shoulders. "We're not done," she said. He covered her hand with his. "I know." And for the first time since the applause had faded, Carson felt something like anticipation. Chapter 3, False Starts and Old Dreams. Carson's first mistake was believing that rediscovering himself would feel like remembering where he'd parked. He stood in the garage on a Saturday morning, hands on hips, surveying the accumulated evidence of 25 years of practical living. Rakes, coolers, a folded stroller that refused to die. Boxes labeled taxes with years written in marker like headstones. Somewhere in here, he was convinced, lived the man he used to be. He opened a box and immediately sneezed. Dust coated his fingers. Inside were cables that no longer connected to anything and a spiral notebook warped from humidity. He flipped it open. Song lyrics. Half finished. Earnest. Terrible. Carson laughed out loud. A bark that echoed off the concrete. "Wow," he said to no one. "You were dramatic." The guitar case leaned against the wall, exactly where he'd left it the day he sold the instrument inside. He lifted the empty case, surprised by how light it felt. Inside the house, Melody watched from the kitchen window, pretending she was only glancing. She sipped her tea and frowned thoughtfully. When Carson came back inside, he carried the notebook like it might run away. "Find buried treasure?" she asked. "More like archaeological remains," he said. Turns out I once thought rhyming fire with desire was bold. She smiled despite herself. We all have pasts. He hesitated. I signed up for a class. Her smile paused. What kind of class? Introductory songwriting. Melody blinked. You don't play an instrument. I used to. You sold your guitar. Yes. So. He lifted his phone. I bought another one. She stared at him, then laughed. That was fast. I didn't want to overthink it. That might be a first. The guitar arrived Tuesday. Carson opened the box with the reverence usually reserved for newborns and antiques. The wood gleamed. He held it awkwardly, fingers stiff, posture wrong. He strummed. The sound was optimistic. Later that evening, Melody sat on the couch with a book she wasn't reading, while Carson attempted to tune the guitar using an app that spoke to him like a disappointed kindergarten teacher. No, the app said. Too sharp. He adjusted. Strummed again. Still sharp. I'm trying, Carson muttered. Melody bit her lip. After 20 minutes, he played something vaguely chord-shaped. How's it going? She asked. Like muscle memory died and left no forwarding address. She closed her book. Do you want help? With what? Quitting, she said lightly. He snorted. Not yet. The class met Thursday night at a community center that smelled like lemon cleaner and regret. Carson arrived early, clutching his guitar like a security blanket. The instructor was 30-something, enthusiastic, and used the word journey unironically. Carson was the oldest person in the room by at least a decade. Welcome, creators, the instructor said. Let's go around and share why we're here. Carson listened as people talked about expression, passion, healing. When it was his turn, he cleared his throat. I raised 2 kids. There was a pause. And, he added, I thought I'd see who I am when no one needs a permission slip. A woman across from him nodded slowly. That's brave. Carson wasn't sure bravery had anything to do with it. Mostly it felt like showing up late to a party and hoping no one noticed. The first exercise involved sharing lyrics. Carson declined. On the drive home, he rolled down the window despite the cold, letting the air slap his face awake. At home, Melody waited up, perched on the edge of the bed. How was it? She asked. Humbling. Bad. No, he said. Necessary. He sat beside her. I think I expected this to feel like reclaiming something. Instead it feels like meeting a stranger who happens to have my handwriting. She studied him. Are you disappointed? Not exactly, he said. Just adjusting. The next week, Carson tried running. He lasted 9 minutes. On the sidewalk outside their house, hands on knees, lungs burning, he laughed again. You absolute fool, he told himself. You thought you could outrun time? He tried writing instead. Sat at the dining table with a blank document open and stared at it like it had personally offended him. Nothing came. Melody passed by, paused. Stuck. I used to have thoughts, he said. Endless ones. Now you have perspective. That's not helping. She leaned against the doorway. You don't have to be good at this. I know. You don't sound like you know. He rubbed his face. I'm afraid that if I peel back the layers, there's nothing underneath. Just a guy who was useful. Melody crossed the room and rested a hand on his shoulder. You were never just useful. He looked up at her. Then why does it feel like I don't know how to exist without a function? She didn't answer right away. Because you were very good at your function. That night, she lay awake after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling fan. She realized something uncomfortable. She had never doubted who she was. Her friends, her routines, her interests, they had evolved, but they'd always been hers. She'd assumed Carson didn't need the same because he never asked. Watching him flounder was harder than watching him sacrifice. The following Saturday, Carson came home from class quieter than usual. Everything okay? Melody asked. I shared, he said. And I didn't die. She smiled. High bar. I sang, he added. Her eyebrows shot up. You never sing. I know. How was it? He thought about it. Terrifying. Liberating. Off-key. She laughed. Sounds about right. He set the guitar down gently. I don't think this is the thing. She tilted her head. You're quitting already? No, he said. I'm learning. She considered that, then nodded. That's different. He met her eyes. I don't know what the thing is yet. That's okay, she said. You're allowed to be unfinished. The word lingered between them. Later, as they washed dishes side by side, Carson felt something unfamiliar. Not certainty, not triumph, but momentum. False starts still moved you forward. And for the first time in a very long while, that felt like enough. Chapter 4, Melody's turn. Melody Dellan had always believed she was good at noticing things. She noticed when a friend needed space instead of advice. She noticed when a conversation was about to turn sharp and softened it with humor. She noticed when Carson was tired before he admitted it, when the kids were lying badly, when a room needed rearranging to breathe better. What she hadn't noticed, what unsettled her now, was how thoroughly she had accepted her husband's steadiness as permanence. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt inquisitive. Melody stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom, the one that had been Erica's until a week ago. The walls were bare now, stripped of posters and photos, the faint outlines of frames still visible like ghosts of decisions made. She crossed her arms and exhaled. "So this is it," she murmured. She hadn't expected sadness exactly. More like disorientation. She had prepared for the kids leaving emotionally, logistically, socially. What she hadn't prepared for was Carson arriving somewhere new. Downstairs, she could hear him playing the guitar. Or trying to. The sounds came in uneven bursts. String buzz, hesitant chords, pauses long enough to suggest self-doubt. She smiled despite herself. At first, she'd told herself his restlessness was temporary. A phase. A natural wobble after a milestone. But phases didn't usually come with notebooks and late-night introspection. Melody sat on the edge of the bed and tried to be honest with herself in a way she usually reserved for long walks and trusted friends. She had always had her life, not instead of her family. Alongside it, book club on Tuesdays, yoga on Thursdays, weekend coffees that stretched into lunches, volunteering at the community garden, where people knew her as Melody first, mother second, wife third. She had never questioned her right to those things. Why would she? She'd needed them to stay sane, generous, herself. She hadn't withheld anything from Carson. She simply hadn't noticed what he'd given up. The realization pricked. Later that afternoon, Melody drove to meet her friend Susan at their usual cafe. Susan was already there, reading glasses perched on her head, latte cooling untouched. "You look thoughtful," Susan said as Melody sat down. "That obvious? You rearranged your schedule to be early. That's never casual." Melody laughed weakly. "Carson's having a moment." Susan's eyebrows lifted with interest. "Oh, he's rediscovering himself." Susan grinned. "Isn't that what everyone's doing now? This feels different." "How so?" Melody stirred her coffee, watching the foam swirl. "It's like I realized I've been running parallel to him this whole time. Same direction, same speed, but different lanes." Susan considered that. And now he's changing lanes." Susan tilted her head. "Are you worried he won't signal?" "No," Melody said immediately. Then, more slowly, "I'm worried I didn't notice the road widening." Susan leaned back. "You're allowed to be startled. You're not allowed to make it about your failure." Melody smiled ruefully. "You always say things like that, because you always need to hear them." That night, Melody watched Carson cook dinner. A simple stir-fry he'd made 100 times. Except tonight he moved differently. Less efficient. More present. He tasted the sauce twice, frowned, adjusted it, tasted again. "You're hovering," he said without turning around. "I'm observing," she corrected. "Same thing." She smiled and leaned against the counter. "How was class?" He shrugged. "Good. Hard. I think I offended a guy by not liking his lyrics." "Did you tell him that?" "No," he said. "I just asked why he wrote them." She laughed. "That'll do it." He plated the food carefully, then sat across from her. "You've been quiet today." She considered lying, then didn't. "I'm realizing something," she said. His shoulders tensed, not defensively, but attentively. "I've always had space to be myself," she continued. "And I assumed you did too." He nodded slowly. "I think I assumed that as well." "I didn't take it from you," she said, needing to say it. "I know. But I also didn't ask." "That's true." She winced. "You're very calm about this." He smiled faintly. "I've had time to process." She sighed. "I keep wondering if I should have noticed sooner." "Would it have changed anything?" he asked. She thought about that. About soccer schedules and late meetings and the 1,000 small decisions that had built their life. "No," she said. "Probably not." "Then maybe now is when we're supposed to notice." After dinner, Melody went to her yoga class out of habit. She moved through the poses automatically at first, then felt something unexpected. Distraction. Her breath faltered. Her balance wobbled. When did I stop choosing this and start defaulting to it? She wondered. Driving home, she felt a flicker of unease. Not about Carson. About herself. At home, Carson sat at the dining table, notebook open, staring at the page. "Any breakthroughs?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I think that's okay." She sat across from him. "I think I need something too." He looked up. "Something new. Something chosen," she said. He nodded, understanding more than she'd expected. That night, lying in bed, Melody stared at the ceiling fan the way Carson had nights before. She realized something else, equally unsettling and oddly hopeful. Their marriage had been built on coordination. Maybe now it could be built on curiosity. She rolled onto her side, facing him, and rested her hand on his arm. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. "We're still learning," she whispered to the dark. And for the first time since the house had gone quiet, Melody felt not left behind, but invited forward. Chapter 5, Separate Roads, Parallel Miles. By Monday morning, the Dellan household had developed a new rhythm, one that didn't announce itself but insisted on being noticed. Carson left the house with a backpack now. Not a briefcase, not a lunch pail, but a backpack that suggested intention rather than obligation. Melody watched him from the front window as he checked his phone, adjusted the straps, and hesitated before opening the car door, as if bracing himself for something that might chase him down the driveway. "Good luck," she called. He turned, surprised. "With what?" She smiled. "With whatever you're doing today." He laughed. "Thanks, I think." After he left, Melody stood in the quiet living room and felt the absence differently than before. It wasn't loneliness. It was the sensation of unused space, time she hadn't planned to fill. She glanced at her calendar. Yoga was cancelled. Book club wasn't until next week. The garden volunteer hours had been reduced for the season. For the first time in years, Melody had nothing she had to do. She frowned at that. Carson, meanwhile, sat in the parking lot of the community arts center, engine idling. He stared at the building, then at the flyer on his phone. Creative writing workshop, personal narratives. 6 weeks. He hadn't told Melody about this one. Not because he was hiding it, but because he wanted to walk through the door without commentary. Inside, the room was smaller than he expected. Intimate. The instructor, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a voice that carried, welcomed everyone and asked them to write for 10 minutes about a moment that changed them without announcing itself. Carson stared at the page. He wrote about a kitchen table and a mug gone cold. At home, Melody wandered into the spare bedroom and opened a drawer she hadn't touched since Erica left. Inside were old craft supplies, forgotten projects, a half-finished scarf she'd abandoned because she convinced herself she didn't have the patience anymore. She picked up the yarn. "I have patience," she said aloud. "I just stopped testing it." She spent the afternoon untangling the mess. It was slow work, frustrating, satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. That evening, Carson came home lighter than he'd left. He set his backpack down and leaned against the counter. "How was your day?" he asked. "Quiet," Melody said. "Yours?" Loud internally. She smiled. "That sounds promising." They ate dinner without ceremony. The conversation drifted easily. Small observations, shared humor, nothing heavy. But underneath it ran a current of awareness, like both of them were waiting for something to surface. Afterward, Melody cleared the table while Carson wiped the counters. "I signed up for something," Melody said casually. Carson paused. "Oh, knitting group. Thursdays." He nodded. "You knit." "I used to," she corrected. "I want to again." He smiled, genuinely pleased. "That's great." She watched his reaction closely and felt an unexpected swell of relief. He wasn't threatened. He wasn't distant. He was simply supportive. Over the next few weeks, they settled into separate routines. Carson attended his workshops and came home with notebooks filled with observations instead of conclusions. He discovered that writing wasn't about reclaiming who he'd been, but articulating who he was becoming. Sometimes he shared pieces with Melody. Sometimes he didn't. Melody re-entered her own interests with a sharper awareness. She noticed how often she'd chosen familiarity over curiosity, how easy it had been to let her hobbies become habits rather than explorations. They passed each other in the hallway like colleagues on different projects, smiling, checking in, moving on. One night, Carson came home later than usual. Melody sat on the couch, knitting needles clicking softly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said, loosening his jacket. "We stayed after to talk." "About?" He hesitated. "About regret." She set the knitting down. And how it's not the same as reflection." She nodded slowly. "I think I've confused those before." He sat beside her. "Me too." They didn't touch. Not because they were avoiding it, but because it didn't feel necessary to bridge the space. The comedy came in the misfires. Carson forgot to put gas in the car because no one had reminded him in years. Melody burned dinner twice in 1 week because she kept thinking about patterns instead of temperatures. They laughed at themselves more, apologized less. One Saturday, they attempted to have a spontaneous day together. It went poorly. They drove to a nearby town, wandered aimlessly, disagreed about lunch, and ended up sitting in silence at a cafe that was too loud and not charming enough to justify the drive. "Well," Melody said finally, stirring her drink. "That was underwhelming." Carson snorted. "We tried to force it. Like a date," she said. "Like a meeting," he corrected. They went home early. That night, Melody lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She realized she missed him, not physically, not emotionally, but situationally. She missed the ease of shared momentum. In the dark, Carson turned onto his side. "You awake?" he asked. "Yes. I think we're doing this wrong." She turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I think we're treating our independence like a test," he said. "Like if we do it well enough, we'll deserve each other again." She considered that. "What's the alternative?" "Letting it be messy," he said. "Letting it overlap." She smiled faintly. "You're saying we should stop scheduling spontaneity. I'm saying we should stop trying to prove anything." They lay there, breathing in sync without effort. The next week, Melody showed up unannounced at the arts center. She stood in the back of the room as Carson read something aloud, his voice steady, His posture relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in years. When he spotted her, he stumbled over a word and laughed at himself. After class, he approached her, eyes bright. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to," she said simply. Later, Carson sat through Melody's knitting group, surrounded by women who spoke in shorthand and laughed loudly. He fumbled with yarn, listened more than he talked, and felt oddly welcome. On the drive home, he said, "You're good at that." "At what?" "Being yourself in a room." She glanced at him. "So are you." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Separate roads, Melody realized, didn't mean distance. Sometimes they just meant better views. And as their paths continued forward, distinct but aligned, the space between them no longer felt like a gap to be closed, but a place where something new could grow. Chapter 6, Rediscovery. The thing about rediscovery, Carson learned, was that it rarely announced itself. It arrived sideways, through inconvenience, coincidence, or a moment you nearly declined. The invitation came from Melody's friend Susan, delivered casually over speakerphone while Melody chopped onions. "We're doing a trivia night fundraiser," Susan said. "You two should come." Melody grimaced at Carson. "We're terrible at trivia." "That's the point," Susan replied. "Humbling and for a good cause." Carson mouthed, "Say yes." Melody raised an eyebrow. "You want to?" He nodded. "I think so." "All right," Melody said into the phone. "We're in." The bar was louder than either of them preferred and more crowded than they'd anticipated. Carson felt immediately aware of his age. Not in a bitter way, but in a my knees have opinions way. Melody scanned the room, amused. "I haven't been in a place like this on a weeknight in years," she said. "Same," Carson replied. "I feel rebellious." They were assigned to a team with two strangers, a woman named Dana who took trivia very seriously and her husband Mark, who did not. Carson and Melody exchanged glances and smiled. The questions started easy, then veered into absurdity. "What year did the first email get sent?" the host asked. Dana looked panicked. Mark shrugged. "Feels like a trick." Carson leaned in. 1971. Melody blinked. "How do you know that?" "I read an article once," he said. "It stuck." They wrote it down. It was correct. Melody stared at him. "Who are you?" He grinned. Apparently useful in niche scenarios. As the night went on, something loosened between them. They whispered answers, argued playfully, laughed too loudly when they got something wrong. At one point, Melody leaned over and kissed his cheek without thinking. He froze for half a second, then relaxed. They didn't win, but they didn't care. Walking back to the car, Melody slipped her hand into his. Felt natural, not symbolic. "That was fun," she said. "It was," he agreed. "We should do things like that more." She nodded. Without planning them to death. The following Saturday, Carson suggested a drive. "Where?" Melody asked. "I don't know," he said. "That's the appeal." They ended up at a coastal town they'd visited once years ago with the kids, back when every outing required snacks, sunscreen, and negotiation. Now they walked the boardwalk unencumbered. Melody stopped at a small art gallery window. "Look at that," she said. Inside, a painting caught Carson's eye, not because it was extraordinary, but because it felt unfinished in a way that was intentional. "I like that one," he said. "Because it looks like it doesn't know what it wants to be yet?" Melody teased. He smiled. "Exactly." They shared fish and chips at a place that hadn't updated its menu since the 90s. Carson stole fries off Melody's plate. She let him. At the edge of the pier, Melody leaned against the railing and watched the water. "I used to think rediscovery meant going backward," she said. "Like finding old versions of ourselves and dusting them off." Carson rested his arms beside hers. "I thought that too. And now I think it's more like editing," he said. "Keeping what still works." She turned to him. "What works?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked at the lines time had added and the familiarity that had deepened rather than dulled. "Us," he said simply. The word landed gently. That night, back home, they moved through the house together, unhurried. Melody changed into comfortable clothes. Carson set his notebook aside. In the bedroom, they stood awkwardly for a moment, neither wanting to assume anything. Melody broke the silence with a small laugh. "We're being weird." "A little," Carson admitted. She stepped closer. "We don't have to be." He reached for her, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. The kiss wasn't desperate or nostalgic. It was curious, present. Later, lying side by side, Melody traced circles on his arm. "I like who you're becoming," she said. "I like who you are when you're choosing things again," he replied. She smiled in the dark. "We're different." "Yes, better." He considered that. "More honest." She nodded. "I can live with that." Outside, the house remained quiet, but no longer empty. It held laughter now. Possibility. The soft comfort of two people rediscovering not what they'd lost, but what they were still capable of finding. Together. Chapter 7. Redefining marriage. They didn't sit down to redefine their marriage with a whiteboard or a list. It happened on a Wednesday evening when the dishwasher was half loaded and Carson realized He didn't remember the last time they'd talked about anything practical. "Do you think," he said, holding a plate in midair, "that we've been avoiding logistics on purpose?" Melody looked up from the silverware drawer. "I think we've been enjoying not needing them." He smiled. "Fair." She slid the drawer shut and leaned against the counter. "But you're thinking about something." "I am." She waited. He appreciated that she didn't rush him anymore. Not because she'd learned patience, but because she trusted the pause. "I got asked something in class," he said. "What success looks like at this stage. And I realized I don't know if I've ever answered that question without including someone else's needs." Melody crossed her arms, thoughtful. "That doesn't mean it was wrong." "No," he said, "but it might mean it's incomplete." They finished the dishes in companionable silence. Later, they moved to the living room, the lamps casting soft pools of light. Melody curled into the corner of the couch. Carson sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth without crowding it. "I've been thinking too," she said. He glanced at her. About how much of our marriage has been based on efficiency." He laughed quietly. "We were very good at it." "We were," she agreed. "We divided labor. We solved problems. We supported each other's roles. And now," she said slowly, "I don't want to manage us anymore." The word manage landed with unexpected weight. "I don't want to either," Carson said. She turned toward him. "I don't want to be the one who remembers everything, or anticipates your needs, or smooths the path." He nodded. "I don't want to be the one who quietly absorbs everything and calls it stability." They looked at each other, the shared recognition both sobering and oddly intimate. "So what does that make us?" Melody asked. Carson considered. "Two people who choose each other instead of defaulting." She smiled faintly. "That sounds less efficient." "More interesting," he countered. The next test came sooner than expected. Their son called Friday night. "Hey," he said. "Erica and I were thinking of coming home next weekend." Melody and Carson exchanged a glance. "That's great," Melody said. "What for?" "Nothing," he replied. "Just visiting." After they hung up, Melody leaned back, exhaling. Old US would have immediately planned meals. "Cleaned the house," Carson added. "Rearranged schedules. Prepared emotionally." They laughed. "So," Melody said, "what do we do now?" Carson grinned. "We ask them what they want to do." She stared at him, then laughed harder. "Revolutionary." When the kids arrived the following weekend, they noticed the difference immediately. The house was tidy but not staged. Dinner was takeout. Conversation meandered. "You guys seem relaxed," their son observed. Melody smiled. "We are." Erica raised an eyebrow. "Should we be worried?" "No," Carson said. "Just aware." Later that night, after the kids went out with friends, Melody and Carson sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the dark settle. "I used to think redefining marriage meant fixing something," Melody said. "And now?" Carson asked. "And now I think it means letting it grow out of what it was." He nodded. "I don't want a reset." "Me neither." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I want a version where we're allowed to surprise each other." He kissed the top of her head. "Deal." Inside, the house hummed with quiet life. Not the frantic energy of before, but something steadier. Chosen. Redefining marriage, Carson realized, wasn't about rewriting vows. It was about finally hearing them clearly, and deciding again to keep them. Chapter 8, The Reward. Carson didn't tell anyone at first. Not Melody, not his kids, not even the instructor who had quietly encouraged him more than once. He waited until the thing felt solid in his hand. It started as an email drafted and redrafted over the course of a week. Then another. Then a short meeting that left him walking back to his car with the strange sensation of having stepped off a moving sidewalk without stumbling. When he finally told Melody, it was a Sunday morning, the lights slanting through the kitchen window, dust motes suspended like they were waiting to hear the news too. "I'm going to do it," he said. Melody looked up from her mug. "Do what?" "I'm taking a leave." She didn't speak right away. Not because she was shocked, but because she was processing with care. "From work?" she asked. "Yes." "For how long?" 6 months, he said. "Unpaid." "Approved." Her eyebrows lifted. "Approved?" "I didn't ask permission," he said with a small smile. "I presented a plan." She studied him, then smiled slowly. "You've changed." "I hope so." She leaned back. "And what will you do for 6 months?" "I'm going to write," he said. "Not casually. Not as a hobby. I'm going to treat it like work. And if nothing comes of it?" He shrugged. "Then something already has." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you." The word landed squarely. Not admiration. Not reassurance. Pride. Their kids found out the following week during a video call. "You're quitting your job?" their son asked, half amused, half impressed. "Temporarily," Carson corrected. Erica grinned. "I love this era of you." Melody laughed. "We're calling it the experimental phase." "I'm calling it the reward," Carson said. Later that night, he sat at the dining table, laptop open, pages filling more easily now. Not because it was effortless, but because it was honest. He wrote about quiet houses and unfinished paintings and the relief of no longer needing to justify wanting. Melody moved around the house, comfortable with his presence in a new way, not as someone passing through between obligations, but someone inhabiting the space. One afternoon, they drove into the city to visit the kids in their shared apartment. It was cramped and mismatched and full of life. Carson stood in the doorway and felt something close to awe. "They're okay," he said quietly. "They are," Melody agreed. On the drive home, she rested her head against the window. "You know," she said, "I used to think the reward was rest." He glanced at her. And now I think it's agency." He nodded. "Well put. The seasons shifted." Carson wrote. Melody chose things with intention instead of habit. They argued occasionally about money, about time, but the arguments were different now. Less about roles, more about preferences. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching dusk settle, Melody asked, "Do you ever regret waiting so long?" Carson thought about it. "No," he said, "because I didn't wait out of fear. I waited out of responsibility." She smiled. And now, he said, "I'm choosing." She reached for his hand. "So am I." Inside, the house held the echoes of a life well lived and a future not yet defined. Carson leaned back, content in a way that didn't need justification. He had met his obligations, and now, at last, he had something for himself. Chapter 9, Choosing Forward. The reading was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the same community arts center where Carson had once sat gripping a notebook like a flotation device. Now he stood at the podium, palms resting lightly on the wood, watching people settle into their seats. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dust and possibility. Melody sat in the second row, legs crossed, chin lifted, wearing a smile that wasn't performative or protective, just present. He hadn't told her what he planned to read. Carson cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice steady. "This piece is called After the Applause." Melody's eyebrows lifted. She smiled wider. He read about a graduation ceremony and folding chairs, about quiet kitchens and mugs gone cold, about a man who mistook usefulness for identity and learned, slowly, to separate the two without losing either. There was laughter in the right places, a soft hush where he'd hoped there would be. When he finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm, earned. Melody stood when he did, meeting him at the aisle. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I wanted you to hear it like everyone else." She touched his arm. "You sound like yourself." He smiled. "I feel like myself." Outside, the night air was crisp. They walked to the car without speaking, the way people do when words would dilute the moment. At home, Melody poured wine. Carson set his notebook on the table, closed this time. "So," she said, handing him a glass, "what's next?" He thought about it. "More writing. Maybe a submission or two. And after the leave? We'll see," he said. "I don't feel rushed anymore." She nodded. "Neither do I." Their kids visited the following weekend. Erica sprawled on the couch, scrolling. Their son hovered in the kitchen, sampling whatever Melody was making. "So Dad's a writer now?" Erica teased. "Apparently," Carson said. She grinned. "That tracks." Later, as they sat around the table, Erica said, "You guys seem different." Melody smiled. "We are. Better?" their son asked. Carson glanced at Melody. She nodded once. "Truer," Carson said. After the kids left, the house settled into its now familiar quiet. Melody turned off lights. Carson locked the door. In the bedroom, Melody paused. "Do you ever miss how it was?" Carson considered the question carefully. "I miss parts of it," he said. "But I don't want to go back." She stepped closer. "Me neither." They stood there, comfortable in the space between them, not bridged by obligation, but by choice. Later, lying side by side, Melody reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For telling me," she said. "For not turning it into a fight. For trusting me with the truth." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for letting me change." Outside, the neighborhood slept. Inside, the Dellan house held two people who had raised a family, met their obligations, and discovered, without drama or regret, that life still had room to expand. Not because they needed more, but because they chose forward. And this time, they did it together.